As we heard, the potential for critical and strategic raw materials here in the EU is great. And it is our companies that will make this transformation happen, really. So therefore, we have invited a few representatives from this green value chain up here on stage for our first panel discussion. So please, I say welcome to Mikael Staffas from Boliden, Pia Lindström, LKAB, Niklas Wahlberg from Volvo Group, and Kresten Ørnbjerg from Vestas Wind. Is that okay? Yeah? I think I'll start with Pia from LKAB, because back in January, when the Swedish government invited the EU Commission to open the Swedish presidency in Kiruna, northern Sweden, LKAB happened to reveal quite a finding of REE. What has happened since?
Quite a lot has happened since then. We got, after that publication, we got 5 billion hits on the news. So of course that it put some energy and interest on the issue. Our focus as a company is to develop this mineralization in a sustainable way. So the first step for us is to get a mining concession, and that is what we are working on now. And then after that, we go into the environmental permit. So our focus is now the mining concession, and that will be very, very interesting.
Okay, even though you're focusing on the RE and the finding new findings, the era of iron ore isn't over, right? Mm. So you still produce 80% of all iron produced here in the EU. But iron is not on the critical raw materials list, nor on the other list with the strategical raw materials. But still, iron is a very important asset, raw material, for the foreseeable future. But let's see, my speaker's cards are glued together. Very impractical way. And for the iron ore, you're investing heavily for turning it to real sustainable mining. Please tell us more, because things are happening there too.
Yes, as I said, we're working quite a lot with the rare earth deposit in Kiruna with the mining concession and making it sustainable. Our next step is even faster. I would say maybe that will be our first step. So next week, we're going to send in our first permit. That is the first part of our transformation, both to go fossil-free. So we're going to have the first hybrid demonstration plant in Malmberget, a part of that application, and also starting to harvest rare earth elements and phosphor from the tailing, from the waste in Malmberget. So now we're starting the process. And to develop it and to see what next step will be. So quite a lot is happening in the company now.
Thank you, Pia. Moving over to Boliden, to Mikael Staffas. Boliden, you're one of the largest mining companies here in Europe, and you're producing copper, zinc, nickel, and other metals. But copper is the main one, really. And it's a new raw material on both the critical raw materials list and the strategic raw materials list. Copper is needed for sure in the green transition, but how much copper will be needed?
Let's see if this one works. I think that the jury is out on that one, exactly how much. But let's assume that you need to double the amount of copper in 10 to 15 years if you look globally. And I just want to make that comment. We've had this discussion this morning that kind of from a European perspective, Europe don't want to be too dependent on certain other countries. Therefore, we want to have some security of supply. But there's also a global issue. How does the whole globe deal with climate change? And that means that you will need to have copper everywhere. in every part of the world, and maybe even more in other parts of the world that doesn't have any installed base to start to recycle. And I think that's an important part as well in this. And therefore I said that if we might need 20 years to double our copper demand, the copper demand in India is going to double much faster than that.
Mm. The EU Commission has proposed that at least 10% of the EU's annual consumption of copper should come from domestic sources by 2030. That's not far away. How realistic is this?
Well, it's very realistic because we're already there. So that comes back to the question. I mean, you could argue, I think that we are roughly 25% self-sufficient on the mining side in Europe, so that's better than 10. But is it good enough? And are we going to keep up to be able to keep that 25 or 30% or whatever it is as our demand is growing? You can say that we can do deals with countries like Chile and others, and we probably have the money to pay for it, but that only means that somebody else is not getting it. Because there is not going to be more mining because of that. Mm. But if you think that it's enough with 10%, we're there. We're there.
Okay. And then moving over to Volvo Group, Niklas Wahlberg. You're making trucks and construction equipment, machines used all over the world. And you need iron ore from Pia, you need copper from Mikael to produce all your vehicles. What made Volvo Group opt for fossil-free?
Well, as you said, we're a global company and we have decided to be part of the leadership of this transformation globally. So we have decided to become fossil-free in all the different scopes according to science-based targets by 2040. And we're also part of the First Movers Coalition to help to drive this transformation. So we're in a rush and we need the material as soon as possible to make this journey possible.
Mm. Excellent. And to let the last speaker come on stage, Kresten Ørnbjerg, you're Vice President, Head of Global Public Affairs, Vestas Wind Systems, and windmills, as we all know, are huge and they're getting huger as we speak, and you make a lot of them. And you're very dependent on the supply of both copper and steel and a lot of other materials. Just how dependent on raw materials is a company like Vestas?
Good question. We're dependent on two things. So yes, we're dependent on raw materials, steel, copper, iron, so forth. How much? That depends again on the growth that we foresee. But we're also very much dependent on sustainability.
I thought you was going to say windy weather. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, for the power production. But we have made commitments that we do a sustainable product, but we also need to be a sustainable company and sustainable procurement and sourcing and so forth. So yes, we are dependent. We can't hide from that, and we shouldn't. But we're very much dependent on the fact that whatever we source, whatever we procure, has to have a trajectory to be sustainable. I would say a wind turbine is, we call it wind turbine, not a windmill, but a wind turbine is, of course, tower, it's iron and steel. Especially the steel part, we're engaging with big steel companies on making what you call green steel, or at least less carbon intensive steel. And that's the way to go. But the last point on our dependency, yes, we're dependent on raw materials. Yes, we're very much dependent on sustainability, but we're also dependent on it being affordable because we're competing also in the global market. So I think the Raw Materials Act is trying to find that balance, but that is actually where we need to go. We need to find the three tick marks.
Mm. Thank you, Kresten. All of you have been around for a while and followed your companies and the market for a while. And all your companies, you have invested heavily in the climate transition. I mean, if you reflect, to get an idea about the size of the climate transition, if you compare to previous transformation, how big is, the climate transition? For you, anyone? Everyone?
Very big. No, but for Volvo, I mean, we've been in business for approximately 100 years, and this is the big transformation we're going through right now, and we want to lead it, and this is changing everything for us, really. So it's big.
Well, I can only say that for LKAB, it's huge. It's going to take years to do it because our goal is to 45 fossil-free, scope 1, 2, and 3. And probably Sweden's biggest investment ever that we are going to go through during these years. But to stay with a traditional strategy is not an option.
Then I will have maybe a slightly different tune to it, that yes, this is big and it's one of the bigger transitions, but don't forget, and I think it's important to point out, that mining industry has been through great transitions in the last 50 years. We've gone from an industry that used to have very big metals to water and metals to air emissions that are basically gone. We used to be an industry, and I just take my own company as an example. If you go back to the 60s, in Boliden alone, roughly 3 to 4 people died every year in mining accidents. We have now 15 years of fatality-free operations. So, there's been huge transactional, huge changes in this industry that's been going on maybe under the surface that have also cost a lot of money and has taken lots of effort. And this is another one that's going to take money and take efforts to get through. So it's an important one, but it's not like the only thing that we've done in 100 years.
It's just another transformation.
It's just another way, just another adoption to reality.
Okay, and I guess you, Kresten, you sort of rely on this. This is your...
Yes, back to the dependency. No, we're of course dependent on the pace of the green transition. My job is also to push it because it's a major opportunity for us. I don't think I would be standing here in Swedish mining industry and talking about the need for mining 10 years ago. But that's maybe the change of what we're seeing is that we actually need maybe to take up some concepts, some narratives and talk about them in a different way. There might be a bigger opportunity for Europe if it's actually really sustainable. And because I think that's how the world is going, and it's not only us, but we're often in talks with the likes of Samsung and these companies who use a lot of the materials that we're talking about, and their customers, consumers, they're asking for sustainable products. So we're a firm believer that it might be a little bit more expensive, but there is a competitive advantage in having sustainable raw materials.
Yeah, talking about competitiveness, I mean, you all have to ensure this long-term competitiveness, in your business, and at the same time, increase productivity for critical raw materials. But what is key to succeed? Still have to make money despite all these. Did you said Pia? You said the biggest investment in Swedish industry history.
I mean, in order to get things done, you need lots of things. You need people. You need money. You will need acceptance from the society around. So far, the absolutely biggest obstacle has been permits. We can say all the other things are irrelevant. We have all the people and all the money and everything else that we need to do what we're allowed to do. Now, hopefully that permits will become less of an issue going forward. And then, of course, the other constraints will come there. Then there will be an issue about people, there will be an issue about money and so on. But we're not there yet. So I would say that as far as right now, permitting is the issue that we need to get this done. We have everything else, at least for the starting.
Thank you. And Pia?
Yeah, I can fully agree. And energy also. We need green energy. But also, I would say permits, but also to have the right speed, because the momentum is now. So we can't close this opportunity, because the opportunity we have is huge and it's unique. We can produce things sustainable and fossil-free, and we need to do it fast. So the permit processes need to be more transparent and understandable, but it needs to happen now.
Niklas?
Just to add on what you just said. I mean, another perspective that is a true game changer is also that we start now more seriously to work across these value chains to connect the dots. That I have a relation with Kresten can sometimes feel strange. Why is Volvo working with a wind turbine company? But there is a logic. Why do we have relations with Pia and Mikael and so on? We need to continue this build of working across the value chains because we need to connect to make this transition possible.
Yeah, but I mean, it has to be. It has to be secure, first and foremost. Geopolitics of the world have shown us that. There was a comment here on the price of security. I think that's something that governments just have to, I think, accept. I think citizens are getting there with a war in our backyard. So the secure, and if that comes with a premium, I think that's going to be acceptable. If it's sustainable, even better. And then I mean the last part, of course, we're also a company. Then we have to be has to be affordable for everyone. I do think there's a point in being sustainable, and I do think that a lot of companies around the world have shown that they can take a bit of a premium on being exactly secure, sustainable, and affordable.
You've all been touching upon the permitting processes, and also, do you think the Critical Raw Materials Act will directly or indirectly do the trick?
Well, I think it's a part of a solution, but it's probably more that needs to be done, in order to get forward. But of course, it's good that we're having this discussion. It's good it's happening on the EU level. It's good it's happening on local level. But I think everybody needs to be aware of that the Critical Raw Material Act in itself doesn't solve the problem. There are many more things. I think, as we mentioned before today, we still have, and it was mentioned very explicitly, that the Critical Raw Material Act doesn't change the water directive, which is a big issue for us. Doesn't change other EU legislations were big issues for us. So there are other things that also need to come in concert in order to make this thing work forward.
What do you think, Pia? You were also talking about the permitting process.
I've been working with the permitting process for 25 years for mines. So if you look at the history, in the base, you have the environmental legislation. It's mostly nationally, and Sweden is Miljöbalken. And then we have added on the directive from the EU, Natura 2000, Water Framework Directive. And it has been implemented without consequence analysis or risk analysis. And exactly as you say, Mikael, it's now when the Critical Raw Material Act, it pushes that this is an important issue. But if we don't go back and look in how we have implemented the other directives, maybe it could be that it only speeds up the no to the permit instead. So it gets faster to get a no instead of faster in getting yes.
And Kresten, you're also struggling with permitting processes. You need permits.
Permits for wind turbines.
Yeah, right. So do you think the critical
recognize the issue?
Yeah. Do you think it will do the trick? Will it help?
I don't want to be smart about permitting in mining.
No, I mean for you guys. For you.
No, for us. Well, I mean, we need, like anybody else, to take into account the local communities that are around our power plants, and if we continue to do that in a good way, then I believe there is a way out of the permitting bottleneck for sure. So I mean, sustainability is not only about being green; it's also about doing the responsible things and so forth. And then I mean, we have targets. We have climate targets, they're fairly tough. We have to do something about those. So there will be a top-down drive, a push, and if industry then can handle, let's say, the bottom-up, not resistance, because that's not what we're after, but there is a not in my backyard tendency, but that we have to handle by being responsible and and I think then we would have an edge. Yeah.
Thank you. And lastly, Niklas from Volvo, you don't need that kind of permits. You're not struggling with, but if these guys don't get their permits, life will sort of become more difficult for you guys.
Yeah, for sure. So we support the step taken now with the act presented. There are, of course, articles that we will need to discuss further, but it is very important for us that talking again about the value chain, this has to be connected. So that's why we're engaging so much now in the collaboration in this value chain, because we see the need. And we also have permitting processes. When we do our transformation to battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles, we need permits, or our partners, to actually create the infrastructure for charging and fueling. So we're into this mindset thing as well. So there's a lot of permitting issues that needs to be resolved.
We couldn't agree more. A lot of permitting processes need to be resolved. So thank you very much to our first panel. We need to rush on with the program. So thank you very much. Give them a big hand.